Hello, and welcome back. This video is about building the project for a gameplay ability system based tower defense game. And a special thanks to all my supporters. Thank you for helping me help others. We're going to build this from the ground up using the blank C++ project template, both because none of the other templates fit quite well enough and because it will give a better understanding of how the Unreal bits and pieces fit together. For the most part, some base classes and the gameplay ability system related functionality will be added in C++, and the actual gameplay abilities and effects will be added as blueprints. So I'm going to name this TD because I like very short, simple names for these videos. And we're back in the editor with both this and Visual Studio opened. So first I'm going to set some values in editor preferences. Right in here, the asset editor open location, I prefer main window. Now I could set that as default, but then I wouldn't be able to talk about it every time I make one of these videos. Also, if you're like me, under level editor viewports, there is an invert mouse look Y axis, if you prefer that way. So now I'm going to create a new level. It's just going to be a basic level. I will save this in a new folder called levels. I'll just call this level-01 and then forget to put it in that folder, which it does not like. That should be good. And then back into our project settings under maps and modes, we want to set this to our level 1. Next, I'm going to go to edit plugins. We want gameplay abilities enabled. This will prompt for a restart. We'll do that. It's doing that. I'll just pop open how I like this setup. All right, to start, I'm going to create some C++ classes. These will both be based on pawn. I'm going to click the public so that the header and source files are in separate folders. And I'm going to call this one TDPlayerPawn. I'm going to leave Visual Studio alone for a minute and then create a second one, which is also a pawn. This will be TDTowerPawn. So pawns versus characters. Characters are basically pawns with a skeletal mesh, collision, capsule collider, and movement. We don't need movement or the capsule collider in the tower or the player. For simplicity, we're going to create them as pawns. And with this one done, we can close the editor, make sure that it's no longer running, and then reload all. So for now, our player pawn, it's created with the default has begin play tick and setup player input component overridden. They don't actually do anything except call the super version. We're going to leave that as is for now. However, in our tower pawn, I'm going to remove the setup player input component. I'm going to add a few other things. So first off, it's also subclassed from the ability system interface. That also requires this header file here. And then we're also adding a static mesh component, the ability system component, a default ability and effect. We're going to be using a static mesh component instead of a skeletal mesh component because the assets that we're using do not have animations and they're static meshes. The interface requires that we have this function here, and all it does is return the ability system component object here. And then we're going to use post initialize components to initialize our ability system component. So then in our CPP file, I'll do the same. I'm going to replace this. So up here, we're also including the ability system component, not interface. And then in our constructor, we're creating our status mesh component as just a default sub-object of type status mesh component, setting it as the root component, and then creating the ability system component. The get ability system component function is just returning that. And then in our post initialize, we're calling the super version, and then we're calling ability system components init ability actor info. We're sending along this and this for the avatar and the owner. And then we're calling it initialize ASC. My other videos go into more detail with this functionality and also includes logic to loop through a bunch of abilities and effects and award them to the ability system component. In this case, we want to check that we have authority for giving the ability, and we're just sending along the default ability as long as it's not null. And then we're creating an effect context so that we can create a outgoing spec so that we can call apply gameplay effect spec to self, setting along that spec based on the default effect. With this done, I'm going to compile and launch into the editor, and I'll see you there. Now, even though I've done this a number of times, I did forget one step that was in my notes, and that was in our build CS file. We need to include some dependency modules for gameplay ability systems in the form of gameplay abilities, gameplay tags, and gameplay tasks. I mean, strictly this one is probably the only one needed right now, but we'll include all for later. And now that that's compiled successfully, I'll see you in the editor. So the first thing I'm going to do is in our content folder here, I'm going to create a new folder. Call this Tower Defense Kit. So if you follow the link to Kenney.nl's assets for the Tower Defense Kit, you can download that zip file, open it, and there will be an FBX folder. I'm going to take all those files, I'm going to copy them into the directory that this takes me to, and then I'll be right back. And once you've done that, you can see that 146 files have been added, and we can click import. If you look at the import directions on Kenney.nl, for Unreal it says you need to change the import uniform scale to 10. And the rest should be fine. It will complain about smoothing, but that's okay. Then we'll hit import all. And then because Unreal works flawlessly every time, we'll just keep hitting import all for every single file because we're not sure what all is intended to mean in this case. So with that done nice and quickly, I'm going to go back to the content folder. I'm going to create a folder for blueprints. In here, I'm going to create a blueprint class. Click on all classes to see your C++ classes. And in this case, it'll be the TDPlayerPawn. We'll just call this BP player. I'm also going to create a blueprint class from game mode base and just call this BP game mode. I'm going to open this up, and over in our default pawn class, we can choose BP player. I also like to do this. Save on compile, I want always, and then anytime I compile, file also gets saved. In our project settings, under maps and modes, you can see there is a default game mode. So I'm going to set this to our BP game mode. And you can see down here when you pop this open, the default pawn class has been taken from this one here. I do this here because anytime you create a new map, it's going to just automatically use this game mode. There are other ways to do it. You can also set a game mode per map. You can set it in the world settings for the map, which would be right over here. There's a game mode override. Ours is none, so it's going to use the default for the project. I'm also going to create a folder for towers. And in here, I'm going to put a blueprint class of type TDTowerPawn. We'll just call this BP Tower. You can see in C++ that we created a mesh and ability sys component, which are both here. The mesh is the root object, so there's nothing in between there. So when I select this, I can create or set our static mesh to one from Kenney's tower defense kit. In this case, I'm going to use tower square sample F. That's what that looks like. I'll just compile and save that. We can drag that into the level. Just throw that at 0, 0. So when we hit play, it will use the game mode we created, the game mode setting the default pawn. The default pawn is basically doing absolutely nothing, so it just gets spawned at the player start position. So since it's using the player start position, I'm going to then just go up here, use the camera. With the camera set, you can right click here, you can snap object to view, and then I'll move out of the way. You can see that the player start is now set like that. It's not perfect. If I go back, I right click here and I go snap view to object. It puts me back in there, but when I hit play, the camera used in the editor and the camera used, or the default camera used in the game will be a little different. So it's not quite right, but it's a quick start if you want to place some objects like that. So instead, I'm just going to set this to negative 1500, 0 and 2000 with a negative 75 in the Y. So there we go. We'll do that for starting. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video and would like to see more, you know what to do. And if you would like to support this channel, watch these videos 2 weeks early, or just want to download the project files, you can do so through my Patreon linked below.